Moving on from an unprecedented annulment to opposition boycott and low voter turnout, Kenyans have seen political twists and turns in the battle for democracy.
Absolutely. Now, rerun voting in parts of the country got off to a chaotic start as anxiety, tension, violence ensured that the East African nation remains on the spotlight.
Kenyans woke up on Friday to reflect on their nation's presidential election rerun, with early estimates of the turnout at below 35%, dealing a blow to President Uhuru Kenyatta's hopes for a decisive second-term mandate. With nearly all followers of opposition leader Raila Odinga heeding the veterans' call for a boycott, Kenyatta's victory is not in question. Less clear is his ability to unite the East African nation, whose deep ethnic divisions have been exposed during the bloody and controversial election process and multiple court cases in the past 3 months. Residents who spoke to the media in the opposition stronghold of Kisumu questioned whether the low turnout would give Kenyatta a reasonable mandate to govern.
Even if the election happened, the total will not get to 30%. He may have won, but there is no way he can be the leader of 1 million people and form a government for all people.
When you look at the voter turnout in the strongholds, people did not even come out to vote. Where are they? It means even his own people are fed up of him.
In the central business district of the capital, Nairobi, streets remained nearly empty. Some of those who did not venture out say they want the country to get back to work.
We have to progress, not just as a country, but also as individuals. Yeah. So, as a Kenyan, as a citizen of this republic, I believe that people need to go back to work.
Voting on Thursday, October the 26th, was marred by clashes between the police and stone-throwing opposition supporters, who prevented polling stations from opening in 4 pro-Odinga counties, forcing election officials to postpone the exercise by 48 hours. In all, 4 people were shot dead by the police, 3 in the pro-Odinga West city of Kisumu and 1 in the neighboring county of Homa Bay. The Election Commission says more than 1 in 10 polling stations failed to open. By contrast, turnout in the August election was 80%.
All right, joining us in the studio is TVC News senior researcher Cyril Abaku. And via Skype from Nairobi is Kenya African Affairs, is an African Affairs analyst, David Zaremka. Good morning and thanks for joining us.
You're quite welcome.
All right, thank you, Cyril, for joining us also. Let's begin with you, David. Some analysts have said, look, it's not a surprise that a rerun election would record much lower turnout than the original vote. 35% turned out this time around. Of course, both sides have been saying no, 7 million, that's Uhuru's camp, while Odinga's camp has been saying it's much lower than that, but half of that turned out for the election. What does that do to the legitimacy of Uhuru Kenyatta's government?
Well, there's no doubt that he didn't get the sounding result that he wanted. He wanted to have at least as many votes as last time and maybe more out in order to give him credibility. So this has hurt his credibility to rule the country. And since roughly half the country was not supportive of him and did not come to vote, it's going to be very difficult for him to move forward with legitimacy.
All right, let me come to you, Cyril. Talking about the legitimacy of President Uhuru Kenyatta, in fact, we saw members of his party, Jubilee Party, going into hospitals, going into different hold-ups in the state and country, apart from Nairobi now, to get patients, sick people to the polling stations just to vote for him, just to rack up his support at the polls. And talking about the legitimacy, and we talked about that last week, what will that do, or how important is it for many people to support his government?
Well, I think so far, events unfolding in Kenya have brought one very key lesson home. which is that right now, it's not so much about constitutionality or about legality or about even the institutions. The whole thing has been reduced to pure politics. It will begin and end with the election. With Raila Odinga pulling out, of course, it turned the race into a virtually one-man show. And so you find that, yes, all the cases that went to court after the elections were annulled have all been decided, not in terms of law and order, but in terms of political solutions. You will see a court that will fail to sit to hear a particular suit, and then in the night of that same day, they will sit to suspend, you know, the ruling of a lower court, irregular, stating that the appointment of election officials was irregular. So you will find very instructively that even as at this morning, results from 25 constituencies have not come in. And yet there are reports, you know, I mean, in Kenya that the IEBC might as well go ahead and announce that, you know, someone has won the election, believing perhaps that the climax of contesting that process again will be in the courts. And if we follow the trajectory, whatever goes to the courts within this period is almost a fait accompli. So you can see that there's a pattern that's being followed. That is where the
real problem is.
Yes.
Okay, so let's take it back to David Zarenka.
Once they can get the number of votes they need, I think they'll be as good as home and dry.
All right, so David, Raila Odinga says that the repeat presidential election was a sham and a new vote should be done within 90 days. Is Raila Odinga pushing his luck too far? I mean, don't you think the Kenyans themselves would be, you know, election weary right now?
Well, in one sense he's right, in one sense he's wrong. The sense he's right is that there really were no reforms and changes of significance from the first election that was overturned, and that's why he's asking for another one in 90 days after actual personnel and legal and procedure changes have been made. Now, his chances of this happening is probably zero.
All right, looking at the chances of President Uhuru Kenyatta, even regardless, since Raila Odinga has boycotted the election, what are the implications if eventually President Kenyatta is announced as the winner of the election? We are seeing violence already, even in small pockets. People have been killed, and so far more than 70 people have been killed in Kenya since the October election. What do you foresee?
Are you asking me, David?
Yes, David, to you.
Yes. Okay, yes, well, I don't think this is going to precipitate the violence that happens after the announcements of the usual election, because everybody knows that Uhuru Kenyatta got 98% of the vote, so it's not going to be any kind of surprise at this point. It's going to be announced today, and I expect there'll be maybe demonstrations here and there, but I don't think it's going to make the country explode like it had in, say, 2007.
But of course, the big challenge right now is that Kenya is a divided country. How Uhuru Kenyatta has his job cut out for him. How do you bring back this country to have that sense of oneness, especially now that it's even affecting the economy? David?
Well, everybody in Kenya and the international community is saying to both sides that they need to dialogue, they need to get together, and they need to come to some kind of resolution for the way forward so it's peaceful and the country can move on. At first, Uhuru, when he voted on the 28th, said that he would reach out to Raila, but then Raila has said no, he's not going to participate, and so it's still at an impasse. But one way or another, the only way this can be solved is for the sides to get together, to have dialogue, and it may take a long time and be difficult, but nonetheless, if you just continue with a standoff with the demonstrations on one side and the police retaliation on the other side, the country is going to continue to be in chaos, and as you said, the economy is going to continue to tank.
All right, hold on, David. We'll get back to you in a bit. Cyril, talking about what you just mentioned, when President Uhuru Kenyatta said that he was going to extend an olive branch to Raila Odinga for the sake of the country, and then Odinga said that he wasn't ready for that, wanted fresh polls. Many would wonder, what exactly does Odinga want?
The question is not even about fresh polls. I think, first of all, is that fresh polls should come in 90 days, as Odinga said, but that the agenda for discussion must be reforms of the IEBC itself, first of all. Granted that a few reforms were actually carried out before this rerun, particularly the tallying process.
Yes.
You know, yes, particularly the tallying process, where it comes from, I think, the polling units to the constituencies and then to Bomas of Kenya. But it's not, whatever grounds that gives for fairness and accountability is not enough for Raila Odinga and his people, okay? So he's saying we will talk, but the agenda is the same. The agenda is reforms. What I personally feel is that it is easy to say these things by the books. I do not know if Justice Maraga and his other judges at the Supreme Court, if perhaps they had known that that judgment, you know, they gave on, was it September the 1st or so, was going to plunge the country into this sort of uncertainty. Perhaps they might have held back, you know. But I think that usually, I think by the Constitution, if they form a caretaker government and if they, some of these things could plunge Kenya even into further. Deeper. Yeah, so somehow, in the interest of the state, not even of the government of the Jubilee Party, but in the interest of the state, certain steps have to be taken. They may not always appear.
Would those steps have to be taken on the part of Raila Odinga? Because he seems to be calling the shots right now.
Well, it's an unfortunate thing. What I fear the most is the fact that the sort of violence we saw in 2007 was wholesale. You had the ethnic militias, the Minguku and so on, and then those who are perhaps also supporting Odinga.
Over 1,000 people
Yes,
died.
but what we're seeing today is that because Odinga has repeatedly said, you guys stay back at home, boycott the polls, stay back at home and pray, let's allow the process to go on, but do not participate. I think people have stepped back a bit, but in some Kisumu areas, particularly Kwarangari also, that is still restive, we have seen that the violence is being retailed. People are now taking it upon themselves. You know, and that's where the fear is. If we let such a seat to fester, it means that even the leaders of these groups may not have control over and then it becomes even worse. So I think that steps ought to be taken early in the day. Bomas of the IEBC will have to announce a winner, and then the reaching out has to be far-reaching. It is not just and as I personally advocated, the reforms that Odinga is pushing for, I believe he has a vision for Kenya, okay, and if those visions can be achieved even without being in government, then he should put those things on the table. Let those things be the basis for discussion and for negotiations. If you look at what has been going on, the AU delegation led by Thabo Mbeki, they've been very tactical in not saying much. They've only observed and said, okay, we are monitoring, but they're not saying much. Unlike before that, the AU, the Jimmy Carter Center, led by John Kerry's people and so on, they were just speaking throughout the process.
All right,
but now they've been very careful.
It's all about peace in Kenya. Now, David, it seems a lot is riding on the next words that will come out of Raila Odinga's mouth later today, if President Uhuru Kenyatta is declared president of the country as the winner of the election.
Well, he's going to respond that the election was a farce again, and it was a fraudulent, and he'll make again his demand for another election in 90 days after there's changes in the personnel in the IEBC. But and he will probably say how he's talking about doing this resistance movement, and he'll probably outline a little bit more about what that means. But he definitely is saying that he's going to be a nonviolent legal resistance, and it's not like some people are saying armed resistance and going in the bush and starting a civil war.
Would it be enough then, David, to say, you know, just let's assume Raila Odinga accepts whatever Uhuru offers him and says, look, let's just have peace. But people have lost their lives. A lot of violence has occurred. Properties have been destroyed and all of that. Should somebody take responsibility for the damage done to not only, you know, Nairobi, of course, Kisumu, where Raila Odinga comes from, and all of that?
Well, there's going to be all kinds of demands like that. There's going to be a tremendous number of court cases. There already are a good number of court cases concerning the election still that haven't been decided. So there'll be a lot of this political wangling over the courts, and they'll rule one way or another, and then perhaps sometime they'll be overturned by the next level of courts and so on. So the battle will continue, but that kind of battle will be fine because that's going to be a legal battle that's begun done in the courts. Now, what's the danger is if the leaders, both Raila and Uhuru, don't calm down their rhetoric and start continue with this rather nasty accusations and fake news and things like that against each other, then the country's likely to continue and may even explode. As Kawangware, that's like the first step. I mean, up to 10 people were killed in clashes between the youth of the Kikuyu and the youth of Raila coalition.
All right. And Cyril, of course, and that is the fear. That's why we're talking about it this time. Yeah. Odinga said that, yes, he would start a legal resistance that will be non-violent and all that. But how many people, because we know he's like the father of the slums in Kenya. He has massive support in slums in Kenya. So how many of them will we be able to control and tell that, do not do this, do not do that? Because it can't be everywhere at the same time.
I hope the rhetoric, you know, I hope when he says non-resistance movement, he really means what he says, because many times they speak in English. It's bilingual. They speak in English and then they speak in Kiswahili. So when Kenyatta said these judges are wakura, you know, they are crooks, you know. So I do hope that what they say is what really translates into what they also mean. These people, their followers are disenchanted. They are poor. They are weak. They look up to them as their saviors. And so you will find that particularly, you know, the Kenyan institutions, like the police, for instance, will confront them. And then besides that confrontation, the Minguku, which Uhuru Kenyatta said he does not command and has never had any ties with, which is really the Kikuyu youth militia, you know, will also seek to enforce. Part of the crisis in the slums that happened over the weekend was that the Kikuyu militia stepped into the neighborhood when they found, well, whatever it was, that maybe some Luos were attacking minority Kikuyus in those slums. So they went there as defensive, you know, on. Of
course, the Luos are the ones that have been asking for their share of governance.
If you can confront the NASA armies, or let's say the NASA youth, with the police, how do you deal with ethnic issues? Because it will have ethnic undertones. And so if you have ethnic militias also stepping up the game, you will end up having something that you may not be able to control.
Okay, let's take it very quickly to David before we round off now. Speaking of institutions, Raila Odinga has accused Uhuru Kenyatta of destroying the state institutions, police, of course, the judiciary, and the rest of them. Do you think that is the case?
Well, he's definitely attacked them, like he's attacked the court. Now, I'm not sure that he's destroyed the court yet, but he's tried to intimidate them, and there's no doubt he's moving to an autocratic type of strong arm tactics. But hopefully, he's going to calm down and not. For example, the changes that they asked for, the election law changes, he hasn't signed it yet, and I think now that he will not sign it. So that will not become another issue that will be another whole bunch of court cases. So there's still possibilities. But again, with politics, one doesn't really ever know. And when you have a volatile situation like you have in Kenya right now, one mistake can really lead to a tremendous amount of violence.
Yes, David Zaremka, thank you very much for your analysis at this time. And now, Cyril, what should the regional bloc in East Africa be doing, and then African Union at this time? Yes,
the argument will always be that Kenya itself is a major country. And so their sovereignty is also, as it were, major. Yeah, so the more they can do is advisory. But what I personally think is that the possessors of power at the moment should play their politics very properly. Because what Kenya is going through is something that needs a political solution.
So what would be the proper politics for them to play?
Well, that will involve a lot of things, which
like what if you can
it will involve a lot of things. When Uhuru Kenyatta says he's going to reach out, let him reach out. let him reach out very properly. He should prepare an irresistible carrot. He should reach out very properly to Raila, and then I think he will also need to, you know, because this thing is not just about Raila Odinga. Odinga stands for something.
All right, I will have to stop it because of time.
He will need to have social relief programs for those slums. I think that will help to give those people the ability to give him legitimacy, you know, so he needs to do such
that
things.
we are part of the country. Thank you very much for your analysis. Cyril Abaku, you are a senior researcher here at TVC. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.